ICA welcomes you to this event and thanks you for your participation. To improve the quality of the video conference, please take note of the following recommendations. Remember to unmute your microphone only when you are given the floor. Please keep your microphone muted when another person is speaking. We ask that you keep your camera on at all times so that the other participants can see you. If you need to step away for a moment, you can turn the camera off and turn it back on when you return. Please put your cell phone in silent mode to avoid any interruptions during the video conference. We recommend that you maintain proper posture and position yourself adequately in front of your computer. Simultaneous interpretation will be provided for this meeting via the Zoom platform. At the bottom of the Zoom screen, you will see a globe icon that says Interpretation. Click the icon and select the language you wish to listen to. It is very important that you select the language in which you will speak, as this will facilitate the interpretation. At the end of the video, please remain silent for 30 seconds. Afterwards, the moderator will begin the meeting. Thank you very much for your attention.
Bueno, buenas tardes a todos.
Well, good afternoon to all of you. Thank you very much for being here with us again. We are going to begin with our afternoon session for this series of conversations regarding swine flu. Our first presentation is a virtual presentation by Dr. Alonso Stephanie, the representative of OIRSA. I don't know if, Doctor, are you ready? Good afternoon. Yes, we are. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Hello, good afternoon, Doctor. I don't know if you are ready for sharing your screen and presentation. Yes, of course. And I take this opportunity to remind all those assisting virtually that if you have any questions, you can also put it in the chat, and we will be more than happy to pass it on at the end of the session. And ready, Doctor, whenever you're ready. Just please confirm that you can see my presentation. Can you see it? Yes, it's very visible. Thank you. Well, thank you very much. Good afternoon to all of you. For us, it is a real honor to be able to share this part of this afternoon session of this very important event. My name is Alonso Stefani. I am the officer of animal health for the representation of the OIRSA in Dominican Republic. I am also working as the regional coordinator for all the actions of the swine health for all the Latin American region, Mexico, Belize, Panama, and Dominican Republic. In this opportunity, we would like to tell you a little bit about what have been the actions that we as OIRSA have shared in accompanying the countries that make up the organism in all the prevention actions so that you might be ready in view of a possible arrival, hope not, God willing not, of the African swine fever. Obviously, I have to talk a little bit, very briefly, about the actions that have been done, that have been carried out in the Dominican Republic, but that have also had an impact in the rest of the countries. Because this has helped us, both the organism as well as the member countries, to be aware of what things they have to be improving, because each country has its differences in preparation of the staff, of the veterinary services, and so forth. And we have seen that there are some activities that are a product of what has happened in the Caribbean. As a product of what has happened in the Caribbean have helped us to prepare our member states of Central America. The first is, well, the digitalization of the processes, right? As a product of the fact that it has been found the Dominican Republic to be positive of swine fever, African swine fever. So it has been found that our countries have to strengthen their digital platforms to be able to strengthen all the part regarding the epidemiological surveillance of the veterinary services of the Ministries of Agriculture. And I put this part because, especially in Dominican Republic, it has been a great support, a great support in the sense that from the very beginning, they have worked on, they have started implementing a platform that they call CD Agro, which is the official platform of the Ministry of Agriculture, where they put all the information of epidemiology, lab. And first of all, there were preservation brigades. Initially, there were also some brigades that were looking at all the parts of the places where it spills over and more. So as a product of this, well, based on the experience that they had with this type of digitalization of the processes and so forth, there are other countries now that are making taking initiative. For example, Panama. As a matter of fact, last week in Panama, they were also doing a field test sampling so that they could be ready for the with this type of platform, and also with everything related to the informational material, divulgation material, cryptics that were carried out over there in Dominican Republic and that have also served the rest of the countries. When the emergency was declared somewhere around 2021. So all these materials, informational materials have been updated and today they continue on using them in the region. And we have to mention and give a lot of strength to the matters of virtual training and face-to-face activities with all the members of the official veterinary service over there in Dominican Republic. From topics related to biosecurity, the management of outbreaks, communication to the producers, epidemiological tracing, and the matter related to disposition of cadavers and the right protocols to be used and so forth. So it's not just to take the information to the team of veterinary services, but to be able to repeat these training schedules, be it virtual, face-to-face, within the colleagues of the official veterinary service. Because although today they learned something, well, if you continue on repeating what we do normally, every time there's going to be more questions come up because I understand the topic much better. And today we are experimenting things that are going to help us so that when I come back and see this topic, well, I have another question. And that is going to help them to understand better every day what they're talking about. And divulgation and communication on the field, airports, and marine ports, and so forth. This for the country has been very important because, as you know, the Dominican Republic is a very touristic country. So let's say that per year it is visited by 11 million people approximately, and the population is of 11 million. So it is visited by one tourist per each Dominican that lives in Dominican Republic, which means that the flow at the airports, at the international airports, for example, is very, very high. So what we have done is that we have installed a communication campaign to the tourists that were on the way out regarding the relevance or the importance of this topic of the African swine fever issue. This is important, and when there are tourists that are going out and saying that I know of the issue, in my previous trip, you communicated to me about it, and well, I already have the knowledge, and I have spoken abroad with my colleagues and family members about the importance that this topic has, right? Another Another very important part that I wanted to mention that was taken there also for the Central American country, that is very important for the Central American countries, is to raise the information of the swine population that exists within the territory. Although there were records kept since before the illness came, and the records that we had were the ones that were handled by the private sector. Let's say the associations that they had, three associations, two associations, one that was bigger than the other, that had very good numbers for who the partners were, how many were there, but nevertheless, there is a part of the population that doesn't belong to any of those two associations. So that population just remained there, and like short on that to get to know by the official sector this information. A national census was carried out in the Dominican Republic. They spent some days on the street accounting for the producers that were active with all this a topic of swine production or pork production and so forth. And this has been maintained, and this has been for a year and a half now. And from there on, the official service has been kept and feeding that database that was obtained at that moment. And another part, and one of the most known ones, is the way the formation and putting into operation of canine binomials that are trained to detect the products of agro-livestock products, but very especially of the products of pork origin and its sub-products. So these binomials have been trained, and they continue on being trained because there are more being included, and they are set at the exit of the international airports of the Dominican Republic. This obviously making a special emphasis on protecting the countries, both of North America as well as those of Central America. And here I would also like to say and be very emphatic about saying that this was a product of the strategic alliance that the government of the United States had through the Department of Agriculture and along with the ORISA. So what was done was to create these binomials that, by the way, we received a lot of support from the school, the canine support of Senastica, Mexico, and also from the Canine School of Panama. The support it was so that nowadays we have two instructors in the country that allow them to continue on creating their own canine binomials over there locally. Well, this has come to, let's say, they continue on strengthening the quarantine situation. First, it was put at the exit to protect the brother states of the region, and now they are also working on putting it to the entrance level, at the entrance level. And as I mentioned, the setting of the electronic flyers at the international airports, that's something that was said. The canine binomials have worked or have been crucial in this issue because while they are working, the people will feel very happy with canines and all that. So they come close to the staff and they take the opportunity to talk about the issue. They give the person a flyer, and this passenger leaves the country with the idea and with the knowledge. And also, before the appearance of this virus, although in the region, in Central America, we had a lab that would work as reference for some of the illnesses. We didn't have the international accreditation under the ISO 1705 2017, which is specifically for African swine fever and for the classic swine fever. And so, as a product of all this, the official lab of animal health in Dominican Republic, which is a central lab, was strengthened, and now it is a lab of reference for the issue of uh, diagnostic tests through PCR, as well as for African swine fever and for classic swine fever. This is also something that has been done in Guatemala, and we're also working with a lab of reference that exists in Panama. There has also been a strengthening of the technical capability that is installed for the officials of the veterinary services there in Dominican Republic, mobilizing them from the country to those countries of the region where they had a little more knowledge of the topic of postal control for the mobilization, and to be able to install and implement controls that are very necessary for the mobilization of porks, precisely. Officers have moved to countries like Panama and Honduras that are the countries that at this moment were or had enough experience, like for this team to be able to strengthen with that topic. And well, there were a series of workshops, and among those, I wanted to include this one of cleanliness and disinfection, and this disposition of cadavers of animals that have been detected as positive. The swine, the swine bovine. And we had also the people from the official services of the region of Central America that were accompanied, or they went to accompany this theoretical practical workshop that even though it was given in Dominican Republic, it was also recorded. And we had those people from other countries go there to learn and to be able to take that information to the rest of the countries as a prevention. And just to mention that alliance between the USDA, the APHIS, and the ORISA to be able to strengthen the official veterinary services of the Dominican Republic. And this had precisely action plans that were very specific in some of the points that have been identified that the organism was strong in those topics and that it was going to be easier to support the ministry in this topic. One of them was not an election, as I have mentioned. It was to strengthen and maintain all those actions that have to do with control and eradication of the virus, including the sanitary sacrifice, the adequate disposal of the cadavers, the protocols of disinfection, active surveillance, and among others. The second plan of action, well, to comment that their main objective was precisely to strengthen the capability of the Central Veterinary Lab that as recommended by, which is recommended to be the official lab of animal health, improving the biosecurity of it. And they have implemented some changes to avoid the personnel, the staff, to be able to come in or take out particles of virus from that infrastructure. So the third action plan, well, is the one that talks about strengthening the national quarantine services through biosecurity and through biocontention of the illness in the Dominican territory, which is basically what has been said that this illness has been able to jump from this country, has avoided that. This illness to be able has not been able to jump from this country to any other member country. To this moment, there have been 35 canine binomials working, of which there are 28 that are working actively in those international airports. That very specifically, well, they detect all types of agro livestock products, but nevertheless, the standard, the active standards allow them to seize the products and subproducts of pork origin that were going to be extracted from the national territory. There are also 7 other binomials that are being put together at this moment, and these are To these, we have another 6 or 7 canine binomials that are also going to be created starting August to start working on the quarantine for the entrance to the Dominican Republic. This is also something that has been done because there are 2 professionals that have been trained to be instructors, trainers of these canine guides or canine detectors, and these people have acquired this technical capacity in the canine school of Senacica. And what does this all translate to? Well, that from the very beginning of the operations to this moment, they have detected, and this is until February, sorry, they had detected 42,626 products of agro-livestock products that were going to be extracted from the Dominican Republic. And among this number, there was nothing short of 6,073 products detected were seized because they were products and subproducts of origin, uh, swine origin. So these products, as you can see here in the images, well, they were detected and they were adequately seized to avoid, therefore, their departure from the country. And I'm going to tell you that also in this action plan, this allowed the quarantine service of the Dominican Republic to acquire, and they are in the process of installing 2 incinerators to improve the process for the management of international garbage. These 2 lines of action have been completely taken by all the regions. And at this moment, the region of Central America is we're now working very strongly in the acquisition and installation of incinerators, incinerating equipment. They're also working very much and increasing their capacity to be able to have canine binomials that are in the quarantine of entrance to each one of the countries. And obviously they are, although they are trained to detect all kinds of agro-livestock products, well, we have a lot of emphasis put on products and subproducts of swine origin. And just to mention that what has been done, what was being done from 2019, since 2019, the organism had been elaborating and we have been disseminating and a risk analysis that was made regionally to get to know what were those risk factors in view of the entrance or a possible entrance at that moment of the illness into any of the countries, member countries. Starting that moment, they began with a series of presentations regarding this illness, regarding private technicians, official technicians, producers, and others, all those people that have one way or another to do with pork production in the state countries. And if you, we have also carried out somewhere around 2020 a national drill so that the colleagues from the official veterinary service might know what to do in view of a possible the AFS in one of the member countries. So this type of drills have been carried out in the rest of the countries, although the technicians that make up the national technical services, and each every so often, what the organism wants is to maintain those drills at a regional level, in which they participate with representatives from each one of the countries, at least 2, so that they can also share their experiences, their points of view, because as we know, each one of the countries will brings along new ideas, new expertise. Based on that, The organism has also been working very strongly on putting at the disposition of the countries an application, a mobile application, which has been called the Orisa Library, which at this moment is available both for Android as well as for iPhone. And it is very complete. You can download it freely, free of charge. It is a freeware. It has a lot of technical manuals, a lot of presentations that have been recorded there. The risk analysis that was done somewhere around 2020, it's also located there. And we have a series of technical material that is related to all the transbordering illnesses, not only the African swine fever. The organism has also been working on the elaboration and dissemination of recommendations to avoid the admission of this illness or the incoming of that illness, as well as a series of communications that were issued, just like the alerts that were issued periodically once it was confirmed the diagnose in the Dominican Republic. They also acquired diagnostic kits to be able to strengthen the labs, as mentioned before. In another slide, nowadays we have at least three countries from Central America that have a lab with a sufficient capability to diagnose the African swine fever locally. There has been a lot of informational material disseminated, not only in Spanish, but also in English, and it has been put at the disposition of the countries also. And also through the social networks, but also through the platform that I was commenting. At that moment, there have been funds assigned, emergency funds assigned, based on the working plan that was put together by the countries, with advisory from the Directory of Animal Health of the Orisa. The countries have developed, in general terms, the following actions. Well, as a fruit of the experience in the Dominican Republic, they said, okay, we will give you the space to be able to record the greatest amount of swine fever in the countries, and they also worked with the characterization of the wastelands that represent the biggest risk for the swine sector, that were going to represent more risk in each one of the countries also. And this accompanied by campaigns of awareness creation of education, sanitary education, always focused on the prevention and the control of both of the African swine fever as well as the traditional swine fever. This for all the audience, for all the people, for producers and technicians, and very especially for the owners, because not necessarily the owner is a technician, but it is necessary for him to have the information. And also, we have continued on working with the strengthening of the active epidemiological for the reasons of backyard productions in each one of the member countries. We have maintained the acquisition of input for the epidemiological surveillance, and we have strengthened from the diagnostics, the communication campaigns, the input for the epidemiological survey, the collection of samples, the input for diagnostic of the illnesses. We have maintained the drills, not only for AFS, but also for other illnesses of the pork. There are countries like Honduras and Nicaragua that have worked very strongly on maintaining their drills. And in these regional simulations, they have worked with their national services in maintaining those drills, because they believe that they have to learn about this matter, and also in the elaboration of their own dissemination material regarding the illness. And also Nicaragua has strengthened its staff of diagnostics taking it to Guatemala, that they have a lab for a reference for animal health, which is the LARSA, where you can nowadays diagnose very quickly the African swine fever, as well as in Dominican Republic. And in Nicaragua, we have finalized the construction of a canine school, national canine school. And Nicaragua is also capable of training and putting into operation its own canine binomials as a product of the experience that they also have at that. And well, at this moment, we had four canine binomials for El Salvador, Costa Rica, and Honduras, but nevertheless, they have kept on working, and that number has been increasing in each one of the countries as a product also of the experience that has been seen in Dominican Republic. They have continued on training veterinarians in these illnesses, and quick response through the drills. Imagine, notice that I mentioned it a lot because the drills, because the organism has a lot of faith to this topic of drills and to learn by doing. And the other thing that I would like to mention once again is a topic related to the digitalization of the daily processes. It has worked very nicely in the Dominican Republic, and we are in the process of implementation in the rest of the countries. And they have also requested the creation of platforms, and this is at this moment on the process of implementation. And well, in the beginning, as I told you, only the region only had one lab in all of the countries, only one lab in all of the countries that was able of diagnosing this illness or illnesses. Nowadays, we have three labs with the capability of diagnosing ASF, sorry, and two of them are accredited under the ISO, International ISO 27025.
We designed and implemented a system for sample shipping between the countries that it's very effective, very quick, very safe, because although there are countries that still don't have the capacity, the installed capacity to diagnose, well, given their closeness, they are close to other countries that can help them with the issue, then they implemented a safe and quick shipping system that has been very good to be able to keep the active surveillance systems implemented. And also important to mention the fact that we have strengthened in the entire region the formation of canine couples. Now, here I wanted to show the application for the OIRSA library, which is the platform where we'll be placing everything, absolutely all the publications that have been generated from this organization. Thank you, everybody, for your attention. Thank you, Dr. Alonso, and thank you to the entire team of OIRSA, whom are always supporting us on the events of Norte. We would like to invite you to stay connected so that you can join us in the Q&A session at the end of the block of presentations. Now we would like to go into our next presentation. It's a presentation of a project sponsored by Procinorte, and it was authorized and supported by Procinorte from Dr. Alejandro Saldivar.
Bueno, de hecho, la presentación la van a dar los
In fact, the presentation is going to be by two doctors, Dr. Saldivar and Dr. Andres Josafat. Welcome. Good afternoon, everybody. Yes, we're going to divide our presentation in two parts. The first part will be myself, Andres Iniesta, and Alejandro will help us on the second part, which is the development of the tool itself. The next slide, please. I thought it was going to be important to talk to you a little bit about why we think it's important to develop this tool. And the truth is that Mexico has a risk analysis that is qualitative, and although it's always important to have some sort of approximation closer to reality and implementing quality data, always having quality data, because if your data is not good quality, if it's not accurate information, it's going to give you results that are not accurate or representative. So that's what we try to do to make sure that we're closer to reality and it helps us make decisions. Why is this important? I wanted to mention why this is important because in Mexico, we have almost 20 million units of pigs that have a value, approximate value of about 50 million, 58 million in value of Mexican pesos. And this represent an important part of our agricultural or our livestock production. And this means almost 2 million tons, which are 75 billion pesos, which is a number that is considerable. So there will be a lot of losses in the pig industry, in the pork industry, thinking about the people working in the industry, the farmers, the brokers, the meat brokers, everybody, and the butcher shops, everything. So, and there will be a closed door in international markets that Mexico has opened so far. So I believe it's important to keep this in mind on why it's important to make sure that we don't have a situation like this. And we need tools like this, finance with Norte, and also with the support of the University of Davis to create this tool. Next slide, please. Also, I wanted to tell you a little bit about the fact that we already spoke about the disease. We already has talked about the epidemiology characteristics, but what is Mexico doing? What are we doing? What do we have to face this situation, this disease? Or what is the success that we've had since we've been able to avoid it? Well, we have the national federal law on animal health, which gives us sort of the backing to have all of our regulation, in which we establish the surveillance mechanisms in a general way, where we have the traceability mechanisms, how inputs can be made, how yes, how no, in which way can the inputs be done, and all of this about market opening, right? And we support ourselves on the national law, federal law on animal health and its implementation. And the PPA, we also have, it's in list one of our required notification um, diseases. So this is a priority number one. These are exotic diseases in our country that due to its sanitary danger, it have to be reported immediately, but due to the effects it would have, the damaging effects in case that it settles in the country. And then we don't have for other diseases like lactosis or cephalopathologies, but this one for the African flu, so swine flu. So what we have in it's that statements. We issue statements, right? And each country can have their own statements according to certain information and certain verification data, and to their trade partners that the disease is not present. So Mexico has a statement in UNSA and an agreement, right, that we inspected and declare ourselves free of this condition, and which allows us to support the fact that Mexico is doing something. Also, in 2019, we published the agreement of sanitary measures to avoid the entry of this African swine flu into our country. And this is one of the good elements that we have because this agreement mentions that Mexico will not trade with countries that have African swine flu. We will not trade any merchandise with any country that has this disease present. And and that's part of our agreement. Other actions that Mexico have carried on is the simulation of 2019, where we had everybody involved participating on the simulation, including government agencies, including people from the army, the police services, etc. Everybody that it's part of the National Animal Health Emergency System, which is a system that in case that we see any vulnerability in our animal health due to an exotic disease, we can get it started and establish that each person that is part of it has very well defined what is their mission and their responsibilities, and this is activated. So we created an exercise, this simulation to activate this, having several pathways for the very virus to come in into the country in different states. And we were able to assess the participation of all the staff involved as it was a real, like it was a real condition. And after this mega simulation, we created our emergency response procedures, giving a possible outbreak of African swine flu that Mexico has had for a while. And it gives us the tools to know how to act in case of this happens. And it's part of what we do as well. And part of what we do, we train the people, not only the government agency, but also farmers and private veterinarians, etc., so that everybody knows what to do in case that they identify any animal, suspicious animal with possible clinical conditions. We have a lot of material, awareness materials that can be seen in airports and pharmacies. To the farmers, it's giving as well in different areas. We are giving this material for them to know the consequences of this disease and how to react if this disease starts has a presence in our country. And then we have the passive surveillance, which are fundamental, right? We have to pay attention to the, in-time notification, giving any possible compatible diseases. And then we have the active surveillance in our maritime ports, which is an active surveillance activity that is being carried out in some of our ports, where we have certain shipments come in from different countries to make sure that we surveil and make sure that there's no problem with contamination. Next slide, please. And then here we have a summary of everything, right? We have the agreement. We make sure that we don't allow trade with countries that have the presence of the swine flu. To be able to trade with Mexico, countries that are free of African swine flu, they have to go through a process where they assess their sanitary conditions, not only of this disease, but other diseases as well. We require sanitary records, as well as we need to prevent and work on the surveillance that is done. There's prevention, and there is sanctions in the federal animal health law. Next slide, please. Well, all of this then helps us keep Mexico free of this disease so far, same as everybody in the region. This means that these actions have taken us to guarantee to our trade partners that we are trying to do things properly and that this disease is not present in our territory. Next slide, please. And once we have this in mind and this context, well, the need of a quantitative risk analysis, it's very helpful because the inputs and outputs, everything is in numbers, right? These are not just suppositions or assumptions, but we have a number forecast of what could happen, what will help us optimize the resources and our way of action, because we know what's happening and we can use different models. We are able to use variables that have been studied, that have scientifically confirmed, that are predictable. They have a certain level of uncertainty, of course, but this allows us to have different simulation models to understand what could happen if this disease comes in and what will be the consequences, not only in a numbers way, right? And like I said at the beginning, its relevance, it's in the quality of the data, right? If the quality of the data is not good, then we're going to have something that is very far from reality. Although if we do have, precise numbers, then we're going to be able to establish a trusted mechanism to be able to determine the mechanisms that we have to be able to avoid this disease from coming into the country. Next slide, please. Okay, now, originally, the idea of this analysis of the output of this quantitative to qualitative analysis of a risk was to have a qualitative analysis instead of a qualitative analysis, as I mentioned before, right? We wanted to make sure that in the numbers, we understood very well what was going to happen and how this disease would behave if it came into the country. So we are able to assess several pathways of entry, and we're going to be able to have a number approximation or understanding about the risk of the introduction of the African swine flu and the average of the possible risk level of the possible pathways to come in. Next slide, please. And as well, we wanted to be able to have or complete our decision-making process that could happen based on this disease. And it was going to help us as well have an optimal way to gather data, high quality data, so that we can improve our methodology that we were implementing in the risk assessment. And the staff were going to be able to be trained in this language, our language, it's statistics computer system that is being used to develop this tool. Next slide, please. Now, as the tool was developed, we also realized that from a static tool that was supposed to be for a single disease, this could become a dynamic tool that can be used not only for our disease. We believe that it could be more flexible, that it could have, from having limited scenarios, we realized that we could use it to analyze multiple scenarios. And from one condition, we look into having more possibilities. As long as the staff has the knowledge, we can use it for other conditions, not only African swine flu. And so this meant that we needed the right training so that we can change the variables. And that's what we did. Next slide. That one. Thank you. So this tool becomes a dynamic tool, right? We're going to be able to update different agents. We're going to have diverse results, and we're going to optimize the use of the tool. So we had considered to apply for only one disease, but we're going to be able to apply to other diseases. And what we were concerned about, and we developed together with Alejandra, is that not only use it for swine flu, or to use it for others as well, because we believe that we can get a lot more benefit from it. Well, we have the resource to create the tools. Yes, we achieved our objective, and that was the end of it. Yes, but we expected the tool to go beyond what we created it for, and that's what we are considering in the future once we finish the development for swine flu. So now let me give the floor to my colleague Alejandro so he can give you more details about what was developed. Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, so with that background, I would like to go into, how do we develop this analysis and what are the requirements do we have when we do perform this analysis? Because every time we see that we're moving forward in the quality of the analysis, it becomes a quantitative analysis and not a qualitative analysis. And we see that the complexity becomes more and more in the analysis. We see that we have more data, that this data is more precise. At the same time, we are thinking, well, we also need the staff that is trained for something like this, highly specialized, in fact. And this may require a higher cost due to software acquisition and other things. So this is part of the reasons why we wanted to create a platform that might be a little more binding, and that is free access, and that is easier to use. Next slide, please. And next slide, please. There you go. And so we see that there are tools, yes, in the market, and if we look at it in a simplified way, there are tools that have been developed that can do quantitative and qualitative analysis. We have some software available in the center here that usually have a cost, a license fee that you have to pay every year to be able to continue to work with this. And we also have open source, right? which basically has over 50 years open source, and then it continues to grow every day, and it's basically accessible and used by everybody. So next slide. So here, in this case, after all this diagnostics, and what did we want to resolve, or what was the problem that we wanted to resolve? Well, in this case, our objective was to develop and implement the platform. That's something that was clear, right, in the background. But how can we do this, or what characteristics should it have? Well, number one, it should be easy to configure, right? Because although the staff is going to be trained in R programming, they're not going to have the experience of a full-time R programmer, right? So we need to be able to resolve those needs. We also wanted to promote an intuitive, easy and accessible management so that anyone can become a data scientist in one way or another and making this accessible. Other situations is that we could have an integration with other databases. That's something that we're working on, of course, so that from the databases that we already have, we can integrate with it. And at the same time, we give you this inclusion, these tools that are more advanced every day, and they can be used as a platform so that we can add more and more statistical advanced tools and to continue to make decisions. So we see that this is scalable in many levels. Next slide, please. And so the solution is working with the tools that we have in open source. So we have Tiny, which is a tool, a library that can develop web tools plus the interface and all the necessary tools, right? Like the interface, the analysis engine, and the connection with the different databases can be managed through it. And at the same time, develop the application. It's an open source, so there's no additional cost to it. And just by having a computers, we can start working on it, and you need internet connection, that's all. And at the same time that we have all the programming based in a specific language, and we don't need to have a specialist in databases, specialists in HP or PHP or HTML or Java. We have a single language requirement, and that's it. Next slide, please. Okay, now what is well, what do we have? What are we researching here? In one way or another, the line of thinking we were considering was in the introduction, right? But now, giving all the context that Andres mentioned, as a country, Mexico already has done a lot of analysis, so we already have a lot of information to present it. So we wanted to focus a little bit more towards the interior, right? Looking inside, toward the inside, where we have a little more of needs. Why? Because Mexico has a lot of diversity. It's a very big territory. We have production systems that are very different. There are heterogeneous, that we have specific concentrations of cattle in certain parts of the country. In other parts of the country, we have very little cattle presence. And so we proposed two very important objectives about this. Number one was to assess the regional vulnerability in the country, given the introduction of the swine flu, thinking about the interior of the country, and then understanding the propagation, more specifically in the movement of cattle. That's something that we do have a way to try to start do the analysis on this. Next slide, please. And so the tool itself works very simply. We have a tree of events that can be put together very easily, right? Well, of course, we will need experts on the possible events, right? We will ask them, what are the possibilities, the possible events that could happen? We generate the parameters, and all of it is put into a single file, which is basically the model. This model then is going to go into the platform, and in this way, we're going to be able to do the qualitative or quantitative analysis, but everything is going to be pre-programmed in this file in one way or another. That means that what we're looking for is to make sure that this file can be shared and that it will be a lot easier to spread the information. And now I'm going to show you a video of this activity. It was a very quick rendering of it. I hope it's clear, the example. It was a quantitative analysis, and here's the platform. So we just click play on the video, please. Oh, wait, let's click play.
Okay.
Okay. The video is not moving.
Por eso lo había grabado en video para que no hubiera error, pero siempre pasa.
Well, I tried to do a video to make sure that we were able to see the system, but things happen. I think it's moving now. There we go.
Buscamos el modelo, lo cargamos.
So we look for the model, we upload it.
La velocidad es del video, no de la plataforma. La plataforma es más.
The speed is the problem with the speed is the video, right? The platform is a lot quicker.
Siempre pasa.
But this always happens, right? When you're trying to show software.
Si no, continuamos.
Then I can keep going and I'll show you the most important parts later. Yes. So there we go. It just we can have that view. Then the next slide. The next section. And now, from the methodology point of view, how can we resolve this, right? And what we did here was to replicate analysis that was already existing. In fact, you mentioned it was already says analysis and process. And what we did is we just transformed that interpretation into a model and we replicated. The report is very clear, right? We were able to do a full replication of the analysis. And as you can see here on the next slide, this is the interpretation, and you can see the same results, right? We have the same distributions when compared to the different simulations. Next slide, please. But we can also add other details as well. In this case, if we have specific parameters, what we can design is a variation of the parameters. We add the controls so that precisely any user that is managing or preparing these scenarios, we can increase or reduce the uncertainty depending on what to do. Now, of course, this analysis has to be done by somebody that is an expert on just the issue so that the interpretation can be accurate, right? Here we're just showing the platform. And this way we can make changes. In the next slide, please, here we have an optimist scenario, and here we have a pessimist scenario. And this means that the result will change depending on how we're moving the controls on the left side. Next slide. And here we are adding a little bit more about the validation. This is a sensitivity analysis by random forest, where basically what we identify are the different events that are part of the platform or within the scenarios tree, the way we can classify the prioritization or the importance within the video. What is the importance or role of these events in the contribution to the model? And we can add that differentiation and we can start classifying them and using them depending on the situation, right? Next slide. There we go. So in this case, it's not necessary to use the tool, the platform, or we have also a web platform. We're also generating all the code and placing it in a repository where you can also access it through this library, which is Quandra, and which basically someone that manages R, it can very easily work on the library and directly and work directly with the console or the platform of R. And we have, most of the functions are included here at the entire part of the process. Next slide, please. And so regarding the investigation line, right, which is what's going to be next. Well, in this case, it's an ASICA. We already worked a lot in this issue. When we start to see what was being worked on, they have a pilot program where they developed almost 30 different scenarios, considering different sources and different paths for spreading. And these are the scenario trees that will work with a consultancy from Denmark and with some experts from Denmark. And also what we are working on right now is to take some of these scenarios, take some of them and start looking into quantitative ways of the scenarios. And that's the great value that we're trying to provide and to the institution is that it can be migrated. It can have from a qualitative analysis to a quantitative analysis, right? Next slide, please. And here the second line in this case is you see the part of the moving of cattle, right? And then we have the livestock movement. And we use this data transfer that is gonna be directly performed in the tool, and we can do this network analysis. This network analysis that has been done a lot in the movement of livestock, which allows us to, follow the livestock movements in real time to generate some mobilization patterns and be able to identify or guarantee the space for these patterns, and in fact, create an interactive dashboard so that we can visualize all this data. Next slide, please. And I think the next slide was a video, but probably it won't work. Oh, no, not yet. Okay. So this is a representation of the complexity, the mobilization of livestock at a national level with the networks. And of course, the intention here is that we bring this scenario to a higher level of interactivity where we are able to generate more indicators and that we are at the availability of the veterinary systems. Next slide. Okay, I believe this one's gonna work, but I don't have much time.
Sí, si quieren, les puedo compartir el video. Bueno,
Okay, if you want, I can share the video. Okay, I can pass the video on later. Okay. And the following one, just to finally wrap up, because I think it's the last two slides and I'm finished with that. Okay. Oh, there it is working. It's working, the video. Okay. It's going very quickly, but there we have the amounts, the quantities. We can start to see the graphs. We can see by state that it's there. It's not very clear, but we can start personalizing the movement of cattle, of livestock. And it's really something that is a little more interactive of looking at the indicators. We can also start seeing some statistical issues to classify the states according to patterns of mobilization, who is mobilizing, who has the patterns that are similar, and somehow generate actions, right? This is just a representation of the network at a state level, and we can start working the network at a municipal level, or maybe even at levels in which we have a little more resolution at the database level, and we can start doing it. Okay.
esto es, por ejemplo, las zonas anaranjado, las zonas de
And
mayor
this is the orange zones, the zones of a greater admission, of the zones of a greater exit of a cattle, of livestock. And this gives a little more for metrics and techniques and so forth, but it's what we can start representing according to the size of the circles. Well, it's basically the level of trade that we have with other municipalities. And the next one, please. And just to wrap up.
creo que es, ajá. Nada más los siguientes pasos, seguir.
And then the steps to come, the following steps. In this opportunity, developing the specific functions. And what do we want here specifically? Well, where can we do surveillance? Where can we strengthen the surveillance? And where can we do a little control of the mobilization? Because, for example, maybe even work on the zoning at the level of the network. There is an analysis of communities. On the right side, you can see a map. This is, each color represents municipalities with great connectivity among them. So we see that we have difference of colors, and this means that these are communities. Communities that have a great communication among them through the mobilization, that they can one way or another be identified. So we have these natural clusters, and in this way we can establish a mechanism of zoning of compartments based on the nature of the business and not arbitrarily, that one way or another might be working somewhat against trade. And the next one is this one to finally wrap up.
En este caso,
In this case, a great part of the steps to follow is to continue on advancing in the lines of research. We need to expand the documentation. I think that that is something that we have to generate also. We have to generate many manuals so that people might be able to develop and coexist with a platform. And maybe even we can also document the functions of the different apps, and maybe even improve the interface. The uses of the interface that I showed is a little more simple, so it's to make it a little more sensitive. And maybe the idea is to generate a scalability of the project. Here, the intention is that if you were able to see this, these models can be easily repeatable. We guarantee the repeatability at the same time. We can start transferring that same information to the others. Simply, I make a user and I begin with the risk analysis, and you can take this file and maybe even play with this. And so the next one, and with that, well, to thank Procinorte and the people that have trusted in the project, in this case, Directory of Technology at the University of Davis, basically Pablo, Dr. Beatriz have been supporting the project a lot. Thank you very much to all of you, all of us.
Well, Secretary Procinorte, obviously very proud partner. I'm a big fan of risk-based decision-making tools. And the risk assessment is part of a package. Because from there, then you go to risk mitigation, which is what that yellow box was on slide 27. And then you go to risk communication. And you saw the próximo etapas. It's hidden, but it's there. And so it's a great tool, but if you don't get it out there and it's not being used to communicate the risk, because those red circles on the map, if you're limited in resources and you want to attack those where you have the greatest risk, and so you get those red circles down and you can move along. This is a great project. Well done, team. We have 3 presentations left this afternoon. One will be in this room next, and we're going to be moving from Mexico to Vietnam. And the speaker will be Dr. Aruna Bangala from CFIA. And then we have 2 more presentations, which will be online afterwards. Over to you, Aruna.
Thank you, Jesse. Before I start, I just want to thank the organizing committee for the opportunity for us to come here, for me to come here and give the presentations and share some of the data that we collected from a couple of animal experiments that was done at the NCFAD. Again, and I'm glad to see everybody's still awake after that really good lunch. And hopefully I won't put you to sleep here. Okay, so we can go to the next slide. So I think Kalhari gave a good introduction to NCFAD. I'm from the National Center for Fauna and Animal Disease, one of the WOHA reference labs for African and classical swine fever. I don't have to give an introduction. Everybody is familiar with African swine fever. We know that the current pandemic strain of ASF belong to P72 genotype 2, and it causes poor acute and acute disease, which is characterized by almost 100% mortality. Fever, loss of appetite, lethargy, and hemorrhages are clinical signs that you will see within 7 to 12 days. In 2018, ASF emerged in China, the country with the world's largest pig population, as the virus spreads, killing millions of pigs, and scientists in the world were looking and increasing their efforts to find an effective vaccine. And as a result, as you all know, there have been a number of vaccines have been developed, and live attenuated ASF strains have been generated in China, Europe, and the United States. Next slide, please. In China, there has been no live attenuated vaccine licensed. However, since 2019, a number of live attenuated viral strains have been detected in pig farms in China. And they were suspected as the vaccine candidates probably illegally released into the field. The appearance of these live attenuated vaccines it complicates the issue, because these are, as the name implies, they are attenuated viruses, so the clinical signs are not very obvious like the wild type virus. So you won't see the high mortality that you see, and you don't see the clinical signs that you usually see with the highly virulent strains. So these subtle clinical signs associated with these lab strains could easily go unnoticed. So you will not know that the virus is spreading, that you will not notice. And that can lead to widespread disease. By the time you find out, the disease has spread to multiple parts of the countries. Introduction of these strains into free areas can cause severe trade impact, like in Canada or US, if these kind of low virulent strains enter, and by the time you find out, it's all over the place, and then it is very difficult to control. So it's very important for us to understand the emerging recombinant live attenuated strains circulating in endemic countries. Next slide, please. So we have been working with Vietnam even before the ASF was detected in Vietnam. We knew when the virus was announced in China, we know it's going to spread to the surrounding countries. So we started working with Vietnam even before the virus entered Vietnam. And if you look at Vietnam, we all know that, I mean, you all know that it is heavily affected by African swine fever. And talking about live attenuated strains in China, and when you look at the Vietnam and China border, they are sharing a common border. And there's a lot of activities across this border happening, illegal activities. So when these live attenuated strains were reported in China, we were kind of in the look for any of these live attenuated strains entering the Vietnam. So we were focusing on the border provinces and collecting samples and looking for markers of these vaccines. Because when you make these live attenuated vaccines, you remove certain genes, and sometimes you have markers that genes that you insert into the genome of the virus. So we were looking for the markers, and one of the markers is the GUS gene, we call it. And it is a bacterial gene that you insert into the genome while you are taking certain part of the genome out to make the virus attenuated. So we look for samples that are collected around the border, and we were looking for samples that gives positive results in real-time PCR for African swine fever. And also we were looking for the samples that are positive for ASF, also for the presence of this bacterial gene that's inserted into the genome of these viruses. Next slide, please. So what we found was, interestingly, we screened about 414 serum samples that were positive for both ASF genome, and we were screened for GUS gene as well, and we found that 2 samples had these, it was positive for ASF as well as for the GUS gene. Then we knew that it could be a potential recombinant virus. So out of the 2 samples, we were able to get 1 isolate, 1 was not, we were not able to get. And you will see what you see on the left-hand side is the virus that is growing in the primary leukocytes. We were able to get an isolate. You can see the hemagglutination. And on the right side, what you see is we were screening for the presence of this bacterial gene, and we can confirm, and we could confirm that the isolate that we obtained had the GUS gene present in the genome. The next slide, please. So when we received this virus, we didn't know what this virus is. We haven't done the whole genome sequencing to figure out what it is. We knew it has a foreign gene inserted into it. And first thing we did was, as our usual practice, when we get a different isolate, like virus that not reference strain, we will put it into the animals to see what kind of disease it will cause. If it is an attenuated strain, will we see the clinical signs? So we used, in our first experiment, we used 8 animals. So we had 6 pigs. We gave the virus, titrated virus, oronasally. This is to mimic the natural infection to 6 pigs. And we had two control pigs that was given PBS. This is control. And we collected the blood swabs from these animals throughout the process. And after 48 days post-infection, any animals that survived, we challenged them with highly virulent strain. Next slide, please. So I'm going to show you a bunch of graphs, and what these represents are either the temperatures or the CT values or the virus presence of virus in the blood and the swabs in these animals. And it was very interesting for us because for 7 days, nothing happened to the pigs. They were active. We knew that probably we knew that it is an attenuated strain by that time, because usually by 7 days, you have, if it is a virulent strain, you will have clinical signs showing up. But for 7 days, animals were fine. They were active, they were normal, they were eating well. But starting 7 days, we started seeing that some pigs are showing high temperatures. So they were developing fever. They were developing fever, and they were not very happy. And when we were collecting swabs and we saw some blood in their swabs, they were not eating very well. And then we knew that, okay, the animals are going down with African swine fever. One of the pigs, pig number 1, was euthanized on 12 DPI because he reached the endpoint of the study because he was very weak. He had fever, he's not eating. So we had to put him down. And the other animals survived. So out of the 6 animals, 5 animals survived. And what we did was after the 48 days, and then the animals survived for 48 days, then we challenged them because we wanted to see all those animals that survived after receiving this recombinant strain, whether we will be able to survive the highly virulent challenge. So the control pigs, as I mentioned to you, we had who received PBS, died immediately after the challenge, within 7 days. Because they didn't have any immunity, but all the other 5 pigs survived. So this was very interesting for us. And what you will see on the left-hand side is the rectal temperatures of these animals, and the right-hand side, what you see is the virus present in the whole blood of these animals. So you can see, even after they receive the attenuated strain, they're developing viremia. And of course, after challenge, you will see there's 2 big spikes are the control animals. They immediately, they will develop a very high viremia because they have no immunity and they'll die. They died. Next slide, please. So here what we are showing is the virus detected in the swab samples. These are the nasal swabs, and also we collected oral fluid. We threw a rope into the pen to see whether we can detect any virus shedding in these animals. So what you're seeing on the left side is the oropharyngeal swabs that we collected from these animals, and you can see viral genomes detected, low levels. And on the right side, what you see is the oral fluids, and you can see the virus shedding in the oral fluids we can detect. So this is after the recombinant virus was given orally, and then also you can see the presence of virus in the oral fluids and the swabs after the challenge. And this one is to show you the antibody responses. So this is an ELISA, these are ELISA results from the serum collected from these animals. And you can see, except pig 1, which died earlier on 12 DPI, the other animals seroconverted. And of course, they had very high levels of antibodies. And as you saw, they all survived, but the control animals did not seroconvert because they were dead within 7 days. Not enough time to seroconvert. Next slide, please. By this time, we had the whole genome sequence data available for us because it takes time for whole genome sequencing. So when we received the whole genome sequencing, we found out that this virus lacks 6 genes in the multi-gene family. And And we didn't see any data to support that there's any any wild type virus left in these samples in the inoculum. Because it is possible, because it's a field sample that you isolate, in addition to the attenuated strains, it is also possible for you to have some contamination of the wild type, and that's what's killing the pigs, or kill the pig in the experiment. But we couldn't find any evidence based on the sequence data that there is any wild type virus left in this. And all the sequences supported that this virus is lacking 6 genes in the multigene family. Next slide, please. So this is to show the location of the multigene family, the deleted genes, and this is the just map of the whole genome of African swine fever. And the red box is the show area that the left side of the genome. This is where these MGF genes are deleted. So with these results, we were very interested to see. Now, in the first experiment, we gave the virus orally. We were interested in giving the virus intramuscularly to see what happens to the pigs. So in the second experiment, we again had 8 pigs. We had 2 controls in a different pen, but we had 6 pigs, and we gave the virus to 4 pigs intramuscularly, just like when you're vaccinating. And then we had 2 contact pigs. So those are not vaccinated, but they're mingling with the other pigs, just to see whether, because we saw some virus in the swabs and oral fluids, we wanted to know if these animals are shedding, whether those other animals, the contact animals, can get infected. And similar to the previous experiment, we collected the whole blood, the oropharyngeal fluid, swabs, and buccal swabs, nasal swabs, rectal swabs, and also oral fluids. The next slide, please. So again, a similar graph that I showed you in the under the first experiment. So here again on the left side, you will see the rectal temperature. On the right side, you will see the virus in the whole blood. What we have seen is within 7 days, all 4 pigs develop fever and viremia. Despite fever, all pigs remain active at the beginning, but later some pigs show intermittent lethargy. But on 17 DPI, both contact pigs had high fever. It took a while for the contact pigs to get sick, 17 days post-infection, and they developed high fever, and one of the pigs died on 23 DPI. So this confirms that there's horizontal transmission. The virus that's shed by these animals, the animals that receive the virus intramuscularly is shedding, and those contact animals got infected with the virus, and then they got sick later. So you can see on the whole blood, you can see the viremia after the Gus Vietnam virus was inoculated. And of course, the 2 control animals, you can see severe, very rapid increase of viral genomes before they die in the control animals. Only the control animals develop clinical signs. The other animals that survived, except pig 14, which died early, did not have any clinical signs developed after the challenge. So this Gus Vietnam is inducing immunity and protect them from the wild type challenge. However, some animals are going down with the disease. So here we are showing again the virus presence in the oropharyngeal swabs and also oral fluid. Again, similar to what we have seen in the previous experiment, those animals that received the attenuated strain, they do shed the virus in the oropharyngeal swabs and oral fluids. You can detect it. And of course, this virus is live because it was able to infect the contact animals, as you saw. The next slide. Again, similar to what we saw before, those animals which received intramuscular inoculation of the ASF Gus Vietnam, they develop antibodies, except the pig that contact pig that died early, but other animals that received the Gus Vietnam isolate, they seroconverted. The next slide, please. So some of the pictures from the animals that went down, the pig number 1 from the experiment 1, and pig number 14, which is a contact animal from experiment number 2. So they had the lesions that you expect to see from African swine fever. You can see the hemorrhages in the organs, in the skin, and particular hemorrhages in the kidneys. The picture that you will see following an African swine fever infection. Next slide, please. So we looked at these animals that died from African swine fever, the 2 animals, and look at the bone marrows of these animals and show that these animals died of the Gus virus, the attenuated virus, because we could find the indications of the Gus virus in the bone marrow of these animals. Next slide, please. We also did some additional studies looking for additional, this is an additional real-time PCR that we have done, just to again show that this is the gene, one of the genes that are deleted, MGF360 and 14L from the attenuated strain. So we used a real-time PCR that targets that gene and show that the bone marrow of the pig 1 and pig 14, and also in the inoculum that we used, did not have any wild-type virus, and it only was present in the Georgia virus, which is the wild-type virus. So this clearly says that there was no presence of wild-type virus in the inoculum or the pigs that died with the clinical signs in the both experiments. Next slide, please. In addition to the inoculum, we also sequenced the virus that came from pig 1 and pig 14 that died. So this is just a table to show that the differences that we saw in the genome, like looking at the nucleotides. All 3 Gus Vietnam viruses are almost identical. And no large deletions, insertions, or duplications or rearrangements were observed. Because it's always a question when you have some animals dying after inoculation with an attenuated strains, was there a revertant to virulence, whether the virus genome has rearranged and it becomes a wild-type virus. But we haven't seen any indication of revertant to virulence in these viruses that was lethal in the 2 animals. Next slide, please. So just to summarize the 2 experiments and the findings, we have isolated and characterized a recombinant ASF lab strain from Vietnam. The isolate ASF Gus Vietnam belong to the genotype P72 genotype 2, has 6 MGF genes deleted and a Gus cassette inserted. The genetic makeup of the virus closely resembles previously described ASF Delta MGF strain. However, the origin of the ASF Gus Vietnam is not clear. How the virus get into Vietnam, we don't know. When 6 piglets were inoculated with ASF Gus Vietnam oronasally, they developed viremia, mild fever, lethargy, and inappetence, and shed the virus in their oral and nasal secretions and feces. One of the pigs succumbed to ASF on 12 DPI, while the remaining 5 pigs recovered. When ASF Gus Vietnam was inoculated intramuscularly into 4 piglets, this is our second experiment, they also developed viremia, mild fever, lethargy, inappetence, and shed the virus in their oral and nasal secretions and feces. The two contact pigs housed together started to develop fever, viremia, loss of appetite, and lethargy 12 days post-contact, confirming horizontal transmission of this attenuated virus. One of the contact pigs succumbed to ASF on 23 days post-contact, while the other one recovered. The next slide. The pigs that survived the exposure to the Gus Vietnam virus were fully protected against the highly virulent ASF Georgia challenge, confirming that the ASF lab strains are so far the best vaccine candidates and available. However, ASF Gus Vietnam lab strains has the potential for horizontal transmission and can be fatal in some animals. So this is kind of the take-home message. So the reason for the lethal result that we saw, it's not very clear, but we know that the virus has not changed inside these animals. There could be many reasons why this could be lethal. It could be many, host factors, it could be ongoing concurrent infections in these animals, but it is possible that some of these attenuated strains can be lethal in some animals. So this highlights the need for proper monitoring and surveillance when ASF live attenuated based vaccines are used in the field for ASF control in endemic countries. Surveillance can be conducted by obtaining individual or easy to collect non-invasive sample types such as oral fluids, and we show in both experiments that oral fluids can be used to detect if any shedding of the virus very effectively, because we saw the oral fluids testing positive on 7 DPI a day after viremia was observed in the pens. They are after intermittently coinciding with viremia, because viremia that you observed in these animals that received the attenuated strains were not constant, and it's very intermittent. But when you see the viremia almost all days, you can see it in the oral fluids. To differentiate the shedding caused by the live attenuated strains, DIVA molecular assays can be used, because currently none of the live attenuated vaccines that are developed so far have serological markers, DIVA markers, but you can use molecular markers to see whether the attenuated strains are shedding and following vaccination. Both pigs that died in this experiment were exposed to ASF lab strains via mucosal route. So we still don't know whether getting the virus exposed through the mucosal route for a prolonged period of time will make some of these animals more susceptible to the disease. It's not an area not very clear. So one of the things that you can do to minimize such an effect is to vaccinate all the animals in the pen, not like part of the animals vaccinated, leave the other animals to get exposed through the mucosal route. And also, can you go back? Should restrict the access of these vaccines to the responsible authorities. So if it is freely available, anybody can access to these vaccines. It can lead to off-label use, improper use of these vaccines, which can lead to unwanted fatalities and release of large amount of ASF strains into the environment, which we saw in the two animals that died. Their virus loads were very, very high. Those are attenuated strains, but large amount of virus is shed, and large amount of virus was present in these animals, and these can be released into the environment unnecessarily, which can cause problems later, like recombination and things like that, that can complicate the picture. The next slide, please. So this study was published a couple of months ago. If you need to learn more about the study, you can read the manuscript. Thank you. And the next slide, please. So I want to acknowledge my team. This is the team, Mammalian Diseases Unit, and our collaborators in Vietnam, Dr. Van Phan Le. Without his collaborations, we won't access to any of these samples. And we have been working with him for last almost 6-7 years. Excellent collaborations with Vietnam. And also the funding we received from CFIA, from the Swine Health Information Center from US. And I'd like to thank ProSynete for the opportunity. Thank you.
Rajat, thanks, Irina. A reminder to everyone in the room and in the chat, don't wait till the Q&A session. If you got your questions, write them down now while it's fresh. We're going to move now from Vietnam to Plum Island on vaccines. And you'll notice in the agenda, it says Dr. Borca. He couldn't be with us in Mexico City, and it turns out he can't be with us online. So we have a colleague of his, Dr. Elizabeth Ramirez, online with us. If we can,
Yes.
you're there, great. We don't see you though. Give me a second.
For some reason, I tried to start the video, but it says that the host stopped the video. I don't know why.
Our tech team's looking at it.
Thanks.
You can open your camera now.
Okay, it's on. Can you see me?
Not yet.
There you go. I think you can see.
Yes, we
Let
can see
me share
you.
my screen. Can you see my screen?
So far, we can see you.
Okay. So I don't know if now you can see me, and well, I think the important one is the presentation.
And you're sharing your screen, but we don't see the presentation.
Okay, let me see.
You need to change the PowerPoint.
Can you see it now?
We can see you.
Let me see. It's supposed.
We have a copy here. Oh, looks like it's working maybe. Would you rather we do it from our end? Oh, no, that's perfect. Now we can see it.
It's working?
Yes. Over to you.
Okay, perfect. So can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. So, well, this is, hello everyone, I'm Elizabeth Ramirez. I'm just copy a very brief bio about me in the chat if you want to look at. But basically I'm a research veterinary medical officer at Plum Island Animal Disease Center. I earned my degree of veterinary doctorate in Mexico City, and I joined USDA ARS in 2012, starting to work with foot and mouth disease under the supervisor of Dr. Teresa de los Santos. And then I moved in 2017 to the present, working with Dr. Manuel Borca with African swine fever and classical swine fever. So basically, he asked me to present this, and I'm gonna try to be as clear possible. And I'm going to talk about the development of recombinant ASF live attenuated vaccines here at Plum Island. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this because you know about the African swine fever virus, and Dr. Aruna explained a little bit about this. So Basically, we know that it's a very large envelope and icosahedral double-stranded DNA. It's a humongous DNA virus. So basically, that is why it's difficult to do research on this virus. And we can have several genotypes, two different infectious cycles, zoonotic cycle and the domestic cycle. And the forms of the presentation of the disease can go from highly virulent forms to subclinical infections, depending of the strain. This is a figure that was published in 2013 by Linda Dixon and her team. This has been modified through time, but it's just to show the complexity of this virus, the genome of this virus, and why it's difficult to work with. During the time, research and vaccine production of this virus has been facing different challenges. As for example, we know that it's a complex virus. The genome is huge. It can be from 170 to 190 kilobases, depending on the strain that we are working with. The production and virus isolation could be only in primary cell culture, or in our hands, for example, we work with monocyte-derived macrophages. The adaptation of this virus, it's kind of difficult because the problems that we can have in the deletion of some parts of the genome of this virus when it's adapted, and obviously different challenges in the knowledge that we have about this virus, about, for example, virus-host interactions, the protein functionality that we know, or in most of the protein function, it's based only in functional genomic predictions. Also, we know that when we try to do deletion of the same gene across different isolates, it doesn't work the same, not always produce the same phenotype in this. So basically here at Plum in our hands, the most efficient way to work and try to do research and know a little bit more about this virus, or the phenotype that we can see in this virus, is doing single gene deletions. We are using platform of ASF Georgia wild type, the one that is causing basically the outbreaks all around the globe. And so far we have been doing like more or more than 25 single gene deletions. You can see in this table the genes that we have been working with, and we were able to produce the recombinant virus and then test in animals if those first see in vitro if they are able to still replicate in macrophages as the wild type, and then test in animals, in pigs, and see if they produce attenuation, or to characterize basically and see the phenotype that they are causing in the animals. And then from this, when we see that it's attenuation in the animals or partial attenuation, we challenge the animals out and see if these produce protection or not in them. So based on these protocols or this kind of production of the recombinant that we are doing, we were able to produce 4 vaccine platforms doing the deletion of these genes. So basically, I'm going to go through them in brief, but a little bit in detail. So the first one, it was the deletion of the gene 9GL, or called 9GL, that it was produced and then tested in animals, and they were able to see that a single dose, it was producing protection in the animals, 10 to the 2 dose hemoabsorbing doses, 10 to the 2, 10 to the 3. Unfortunately, it was virulent at higher doses, and they noticed that it was necessary to do a further attenuation. So from information that they were having, they decided to, from this recombinant already made, they decide to delete another gene, the UK gene. So basically what they were able to see in the phenotype is the deletion of the UK increase the attenuation of the 9GL UK at least 100 times, meaning that the dose that it was attenuated also in the animals, or showing attenuation in the animals, it was 10 to the 6 M-absorbing doses. And it was inducing protection when it was administered at 10 to the 4 doses. And also they were able to see that it was inducing protection from 2 weeks after inoculation. Then moving on and working with more deletions, they were able to do also the deletion of these 6 MGF genes, the MGF or the left region, variable region of the genome, that is a multi-gene family genes. So basically they were deleting these genes and then testing in animals again, and they were able to don't see any clinical symptoms of the disease at higher doses, like 10 to the 4, and they were even seeing protection in a single low dose 10 to the 2. Then the deletion of this gene, the I177L, shortly named in the lab 177, we delete this gene in the backbone of wild type Georgia. And then when we tested the animals, we were able to see very good results, that it was inducing protection, even a low dose. We test doses 10 to the 2, 10 to the 4, and 10 to the 6. We were able to don't see residual virulence at high dose 10 to the 6. And also it was able to produce sterile protection using 10 to the 4 or higher doses in this recombinant virus. So from here, obviously, the group started to do more research with this recombinant virus, obviously doing several studies with oronasal vaccination, with trying to develop real-time PCRs to use as a DIVA test. So then I'm gonna go through all this information kind of brief. The first thing, of course, as I mentioned before, one of the challenges is to try to do the adaptation of these recombinant viruses or even ASF viruses in cell culture lines. So basically the first cell line that it was produced here at Plum Island, it was the porcine epithelial cells that it was established, and we were able to adapt the virus after 10 passages of it. Unfortunately, as we do, or as we notice, the variable region of this the multi-gene family on the left side, it was deleted. But even when we tested the animals, we were able to see that it was as efficient as the 177 producing macrophages. So basically it was retaining safety, immunogenicity, and efficacy in protecting domestic pigs against ASF, the Georgia wild type. And it was the first report of an experimental ASF vaccine adapted to replicate efficiently in a continuous cell line. So then moving forward, we make a study with the same recombinant virus to see, or it was called the long-term study. We vaccinate animals, and we we monitor these animals from day 0 to 180 days. So basically it was six months to monitoring these animals for showing temperature or clinical signs or something else, because the first experiment, it was only 28 days period of observation. And obviously after the challenge, another 21 days, these animals were no challenge, but we observed that they didn't produce any clinical sign at the end of the experiment, and they developed a good titer of antibodies. Obviously, after these results, people start to be interested in this recombinant virus or candidate vaccine. So basically, Navetco, a company in Vietnam, start to do collaboration with Plum Island to see to get the virus and start to work with the vaccine candidate. So basically, all the information that we were able to produce, they were able to also work on it and kind of confirm the results that we were having at Plum Island. So basically, these are the results that they have with the safety profile studies. So basically, an overdose, 10 to the 10 dose, does not induce local or systemic problems in the animals. Field trials in North and South Vietnam confirm experimental safety data, and 100% of efficacy in representative group of animals challenged under experimental conditions. Reversion to virulence studies successfully were complete. The vaccine is phenotypically and genetically stable. They did also a long-term study of 6 months, as we did, showing absence of residual virulence. And obviously, everything was performed as the OS standards for vaccine manufacturing. Then in Vietnam also, they move on to start to doing studies to see if this vaccine was protecting not only the European bred pigs or pig breeds, it was also the Vietnam has their native pig breed, so they wanted to see if they were able to be protected also with this vaccine. So basically, it was the same result. Efficacy studies confirm our results too. Minimal protective dose is 10 to the 2. And no residual virulence at high dose, 10 to the 6, as we also show. And protection against local ASF field strains also was demonstrated. And equal efficiency in pigs from European and Vietnamese origin. Basically, they were protected. Also, they start to move on to do studies in the field, looking for efficacy and safety. They were able to vaccinate over 8,000 pigs, doing 2 doses in those, and obviously they were able to have different kind of pigs. And as you can see in the table, the route of inoculation, it was intramuscular, as we have been performing. And then they didn't show any clinical signs, and obviously they were showing antibodies. So then obviously with these results, or based on these safety and efficacy studies, they were certified, the Animal Health of Vietnam certified the use of this vaccine in the field under strict supervision in June 2022. And then when they moved to do these field studies, also they authorized in July 2023 the commercialization of the vaccine, restricted only to animals between 8 to 10 weeks of age. So they start to do vaccination in the field in Vietnam. So the number of provinces under vaccination, it was a total of 29. The number of farms involved, it was 59. And the number of people vaccinated was over 153,974 pigs. And they were able to see that the pigs presenting non-lethal problems associated with vaccinated were from this total number that I mentioned before, that is one over 1,000 case, it was 97, showing only the 0.06% of these animals showing these non-lethal problems. And the number of pigs presenting lethal problems associated with vaccination, it was only 168. That means the 0.11% of pigs. So basically it's very low. So in this slide, I just want to show how the phases of the vaccine development is. So the status of each one is not only with the 177, it's also the NIGL UK and the MGF. So basically, the 177 is the one that has been commercially available in Vietnam. So basically, both Navedco and Avac vaccine are the first commercially available vaccines to be used in domestic pigs. After this, in our lab, we were able to develop a real-time PCR, trying to use it as genetic diva test. So basically what we were able to do is, from a panel of blood samples from naive animals, vaccinated animals, and infected pigs, we were able to produce a set of primers to be able to identify these genes. And obviously all the time we were using the diagnostic reference real-time PCR use. That is the common one that everybody uses is to check the P72 protein. So basically what we were able to see in this test, it was that the comparable levels of sensitivity, specificity, and efficiency of amplification to detect presence and absence of the ASF Georgia to the 2007 strain. And basically we were able to see that it was a potential use as genetic diva test of this real time. And then something that we were also looking for, it was another kind of cell line that we were kind of able to use, because we were seeing these, let's say, modifications in the genome when we were able to adapt in the pipette cells. There is cell line that it's called immortalized porcine kidney macrophages, IPKM cells. That it's this cell line is from Japan, and we start to use this cell line to grow the 177. And basically, what we were able to see is that after 10 passages of the 177 and the ASF wild type Georgia, we were able to maintain the titer and the recombinant virus to test in animals. We test in animals, and basically what we were able to see it was that remains safe and still efficacious as the parental or the grown in the macrophages, the monocyte derived macrophages still remains safe, protecting the animals, and no genomic changes after 10 passages. So this is very important for us to use. And if in terms of thinking about growing in a large scale, the vaccine. And also we were able to develop another recombinant virus where we were able to remove or delete the EP402R gene, that it's the CD2 protein gene. So basically, we delete this gene from the 177, the grown in the macrophages, and we were able to see that it was safe as the normal 177. This was slightly efficacious as the 177 because allows replication of challenge virus. That doesn't happen in the 177 with the CD2. And the animals inoculated with this a double deletion recombinant can be serological differentiated from infected animals. So basically, this recombinant virus can be used as a viva marker. So far, we have been doing all this related with the ASF research. But still we know that we need to do further research about the ASF to trying to develop next generations vaccines as subunit vaccines, for example. But also we need to keep going in the research of virus host interaction, how the host responses to infection, and the role of virus encoded proteins in evading the host defense. That is something that we need to keep looking. So more basic also research on virus host interaction to identify mechanisms of virus replication that may be targets for biotherapeutics, and the identification of novel targets for vaccine development. So still we are on those challenges for research and vaccine production. So thank you so much. I hope you have a lot of questions. Here is my email. If you want to reach out, please do it. And this is the group that has been working with all these recombinant viruses and with the production of research in ASF here at Plum Island. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Elizabeth. I'm very excited about all the results that you have shown. It's tremendous work. I have a lot of questions, but I will keep them for the Q&A session after our next talk. So just please stay online. Our next speaker is Dr. Douglas. I will not try to pronounce your surname, sorry. Are you there?
Yep, I'm here. It's Gladu, but everyone mispronounces it, so it doesn't matter.
Sorry. Perfect.
Okay. Just sure.
Yeah, you are ready to go. Thank you.
Okay. So I want to first thank the organizers for allowing me to give this talk, and I want to start off just talking about the understanding of African swine fever virus genomics and what this implies for therapeutic or preventative approaches. I work for a biotech company, Seek Labs, and I'm the vice president for veterinary pharmaceuticals. I think we all know ASF is a pandemic, but when we started this project, one of the things that people don't always realize is that the current Asia-Europe outbreak is pretty much all genotype 2, except for the emergence of the new 1-2 hybrid. In Africa, however, there's been reports of over 24 genotypes. Genotypes has no real significance, and it was just really a historical type of classification for ASF. So starting to talk to GARA members and talking to people, we knew a reevaluation was needed. And the real question is, how many different ASF strains are really causing outbreaks? I'm going to talk a little bit about published manuscripts about the reclassification of ASF, but I also want to recognize that this work was largely done by Plum Island while I was at Plum Island and collaborators. And this was a GARA-led effort. Here's by the same picture that you just saw Elizabeth Ramirez present. A lot of people from this group have since left, but there still is an active ASF research at Plum Island. But the majority of the work I'm going to talk about today was from the bioinformaticians or remote workers that we had at the time. And what we did is we reviewed historical data, and this requires a very large effort. We had to look at every single NCBI submission, track the individual papers for method analysis, pull the raw next generation sequencing reads, and check for a consensus sequence to see if the reports were accurate. When we started looking at P72, there was no standardized genotyping requirements. P72 had different fragments sequenced. There was full length was most widely used. Most historical data does come from P72. but there was some historical full-length genomes that we didn't have to directly compare. Other groups have used CD2, IGR, or other individual genes on top of P72. However, there was really limited availability and limited use. Genotyping has historically been done out of convenience. There's nothing wrong with this and historically valuable, but in current scientific environment, it needed update. There's no biological reference to P72 genotype. There's lack of serotype cross-protection data to suggest how genotypes could be grouped. And there's no real easy way to genotype identified strains or determine new genotypes. This really relied on phylogenetic trees and individual lab interpretation. Data on NCBI was not standardized. This led to people comparing partial to whole P72 sequences and sometimes even two different partial P72 sequences, which on a phylogenetic tree, they'll have different branches, even though they may be the same sequence. And even in the literature, different groups had some of the same isolates called different genotypes. So it really depended upon lab analysis. So although this P72 fragment was useful for disease tracking, historically, it was difficult to sequence the entire genome or large pieces by Sanger sequencing. P72 remained stable with small genetic differences over time, and this let limited sampling give an idea of what was going on in the field and what local outbreaks were. And there was no real need to sequence virus from every animal, just to kind of have an idea of basic disease tracking. However, in 2023, we have a large collection of full genomes of ASF from different parts of the world and historical sequence availability. When we started looking at the past, there was inaccuracies on NCBI. There were people comparing C-terminus and N-terminal fragments to full-length P72. There were A's and T's left on sequences from Taq polymerase, resulting in new genotypes. People often had submitted ambiguous nucleotides, and this was included in a lot of published analysis. Primer sequence attached to submitted sequences, creating unique P72s. And we also found that raw NGS reads were not always aligning to consensus genomes on NCBI. This led to different standards between different labs' individual analysis. Different labs classify the same P72 as different genotypes. The question is, does one nucleotide change mean a new genotype? What are the requirements? And what is the functional value of genotyping by nucleotides? So we looked at P72 and said conserved nucleotide changes are functionally meaningless as the same protein sequence. So what's the point of trying to characterize by the same protein sequence? Whole genome genotyping is the most useful, but not necessarily available in developing countries or in labs without a bioinformatics position or the inability to purchase reagents. P72 can still be used for disease tracking, but has limited usefulness, and it could have some potential for vaccine matching. Increased usefulness if limited whole genome sequencing of select isolates is available from the same time or region. Looking at P72, there was 11,429 P72 sequences at the time of this publication. One nucleotide change meant 55 new genotypes, 23 if we looked at protein with one amino change. Partial sequences, changes cannot always be, or could be in the non-sequence portion of P72, so we took that into consideration. And we felt that protein changes within P72 had possible biological meaning. And when we looked, just for an example, Georgia, Warmbass, Bengalia, Pretoria were all identical at the protein level, and there was only 23 unique protein sequences of P72 available on NCBI. When we started to group these and we looked, there was very distinct differences between 6 groups of sequence isolates, allowing a tolerance of 3 amino acid changes within genotype. And why 3? Well, during the review process, we had 2 amino acid changes, but 2 amino acid changes resulted in isolates being both genotype 1 and 2, and the reviewers didn't like that, said, you got to use 3. Just to summarize a little bit, we found our new genotype assignments versus historical. So a lot of the historical genotypes were grouped into one genotype. And many of the partial P72s could be multiple genotypes, but we don't have the historical data to be able to look back and see if there's changes in other areas of P72. I also want to point out that we published a P72 genotyping tool with the idea to make it easy for people to be able to genotype by P72 just by submitting their sequence and having the output be what genotype it is. There's a web-based version available on GERA's Genomics Center, and it's also available on GitHub as open source, so you can download it to your computer and run all your analysis locally. Should a new genotype be identified, a message will be given to the user, and this can be later determined if it is a new genotype, and this kind of prevents submission of a random protein creating a new genotype. So we completed P72 reclassification. We standardized a P72 genome set. We have a tool to easily genotype by P72. And we suggest, to avoid confusion in the literature, that Roman numerals be used for discussing historical genotypes and standard numbering for a new genotyping method. And again, the tool for genotyping P72 is publicly available. However, when we look at P72, there are many limitations. Many genes in ASF with mutations between isolates. And here are two examples where there's deletions in the MGF region of virulent strains. However, these strains would still be P72 and be indistinguishable from the Georgia, for example. We also know there's hybrid strains, for example, the new genotype 1-2 that's been isolated in Asia. And this hybrid strain, even though it's half one genotype and half another genotype, its P72 would classify it as genotype 1. So we knew that analysis of whole genomes of ASF needed to be done. We call this biotyping ASF, and it's grouping based on similar genomes of using the open reading frames of ASF. So the first thing we had to do is create a high quality database. All ASF next generation sequencing raw data in public domain was reanalyzed. Several genomes had small mistakes, annotations, sequence errors. Some genomes had large mistakes, such as thousands of nucleotides that were miscalled. And we standardized or added annotation to all sequence genomes and used this data set for our analysis. We also removed poor quality NGS-based sequences that was likely aligned to a reference to filling gaps and was not a true de novo genome of ASF. Just to give you an example of some of the things we saw, this is just aligning P72. You can see that in some cases we had very poor read quality, barely covering minimum coverage of P72. And in other cases where you see all these lines, was miscalled nucleotides to the published sequence on NCBI. So we fixed all this and used a standardized data set, not necessarily the data set that is on NCBI. Now, I've learned a long time ago, when you start putting equations and you start looking at machine learning type stuff, that everyone falls asleep, and I'm the last talk of the day. So I'm going to just briefly describe what we did. We took our full-length genomes, we re-annotated using standard Georgia type annotation, and we had 220 genomes that remained at the end, removing duplicate genomes or poor quality assembles. We then took every single open reading frame and individually aligned each open reading frame to the identical open reading frame in all the other isolates. So we aligned all P72s to P72s, all P54s to all P54s, and so on. And from here, we did what's called a gene level identity similarity matrix. We then took this matrix and we weighted the average of gene level identity matrices to every single gene. And we favor well-represented genes, and we disfavor some non-MGF and non-hypothetical genes. So weights favor things that are not MGF or are not hypothetical. We then went to the final clusters where we used dbScan, and we ran this weighted genome percent identity matrix, and we looked at different levels of epsilon. So what is epsilon? Epsilon is a measurement of how dissimilar things can be before they're grouped together. If you increase epsilon, groups will group more together until you get one group within your data set. dbScan takes the number of groupings, and they determine mathematically how many groups there are by using epsilon. And just to give you an example, when we look at epsilon of 0.5, when we look at two random isolates in here, we have about 412 different amino acids between isolates. And when we go up to 0.53 epsilon, we have 4,511 different amino acids between isolates within that data set at that epsilon. So previously, before machine learning, before dbScan, you had to tell the computer how many groups there are. So in K++wise comparisons, everything must fall into a predetermined number of groups. And just to give an example, if we have 3 unique, they're not similar at all. They're 100% different isolates. And we tell DB scan there's two groups will be formed. It will pick a random one to add to one of the other ones to make two groups, because there's no way for that data set to have a final outcome without two groups. When you do this, however, you have problems. You have to pick centralized positions to determine clusters, and clusters must be distinct. This is not the case for ASF. And this is a problem when you have non-globular data, such as elongated or irregularly shaped clusters. If you choose improper starting points, you can skew the results. However, with DB scan, you randomly pick a starting point and compare all groups based on epsilon. It continues to test by picking new starting points and sets grouping once all starting points agree. The results at all level of epsilon are then calculated, and it's restarted using new starting points until all starting points have been tested. And this continues until all starting points are in agreement, so the starting point doesn't artificially provide bias towards grouping. And this is our results. So we had our initial groups at 0.05 epsilon, and then we had increased epsilon up to 0.53, where all groups of ASF combine into one group. When we looked at the data set, we had a couple of things that we wanted to ensure. We wanted all genotype 1 or 2 viruses to be grouped together. Genotype 1 and genotype 2 are the largest sequenced groups of ASF isolates. And when we looked at this, it also made sense because we had grouped isolates from distinct regions of Africa, and it also separates the hybrid China viruses, which are shown here. We have our group 1 or genotype biotype 1, genotype biotype 2, but the hybrid virus that is a combination of 1 and 2 does separate. So we made it through our final clusters, and we ended up determining that in both cases, P72 reclassification or biotyping really revealed 7 unique circulating strains of ASF. P72 had 6, but that doesn't take into account the hybrid genotype 1 and 2, which comes out in biotyping as the 7th group. I want to point out that biotyping is not serotyping, but it can be used with educated prediction models. Cross-protection studies over time could create additional groups, and we could decrease epsilon or reduce groups by increasing epsilon or confirm the current standard. The emergence of genotype 1-2 hybrid virus is interesting that groups separately because currently the reports show no cross-protection against genotype 2 vaccines. And it's also pretty much widely agreed upon in ASF researchers that it's likely that this genotype 1-2 hybrid virus is a result of improper vaccine matching, as the genotype 1 portion is identical to a Portugal vaccine that was used in 1950. And to date, no universal treatment or vaccination platform exists. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about my current work at Seek Labs and innovative approaches for targeting ASF genomes using CRISPR technology. So Seek Labs is led by an experienced team with a track record of building successful companies. We have a very large, diverse group of expertise that can drive this project forward. I also want to point out, mostly because this group is mostly focused on animal health, and something that I didn't really know about up until starting Seek, is that back in 2006, the WHO published the reassured criteria for the minimum standard for point-of-care testing technology. And this need real-time connectivity, ease of sample acquisition, affordable, sensitive, specific, user-friendly, rapid and robust, importantly, equipment-free, and it had to have a deliverable diagnostic result. Today, we're 20 years later, and currently there's no technology that exists that fully meets the criteria. So I want to point out that there's 2 main projects in Seek. We have a diagnostic project, and we have a pharmaceutical development using CRISPR. So I'm just going to briefly go over some of the diagnostic, because I think it's important, because when we see the World Health Organization adopt different standards, usually once those standards are met, they're met also within the animal health standards. So Seek Labs developed the CKIT platform, the world's first easy-to-use standalone point-of-care molecular diagnostic testing platform that meets all of the reassured criteria. And here's just a picture of the platform right here, and I'm going to go just quickly into a little bit of the features. It has DNA, RNA extraction that's easy to use. It goes through DNA RNA amplification without heat. It shortens the DNA extraction portion shortens nucleic acid extraction time by 90%. It takes about 2 minutes to extract DNA. You get high yield quality nucleic acid without equipment, and it's compatible and works well with blood, saliva, swabs, and other tissue samples. Just to give you an idea, when we look at other competitor type DNA extraction platforms, we get at best about 34 nanograms per microliter. Using the CKIT platform, we have 185 nanograms per microliter on average. And it takes only about 2 minutes to extract DNA. It quickly amplifies the target to detectable range in 20 minutes at room temperature. There's no isothermal amplification. There's no PCR machine that's needed. And we have the ability to customize primers and use this for any genetic target in diagnostics. These two key innovations in extraction and amplification are developed for point of care applications and can be used also in the field for veterinary purposes. As faster sample to results, low cost per assay, no equipment, and enables molecular diagnostic processes outside of a laboratory that can easily be used in the field, clinical labs, veterinary applications, or for biosecurity purposes. Now I'm going to jump into the developments of CRISPR and just give a brief history. I'm sure everybody in the room has heard of CRISPR, but a lot of people haven't really realized the timeline and where we've from discovery to where we are. I just want to point out a few key dates. The CRISPR sequence found in the genome of E. coli was back in 1987. It took 16 years to get in vivo gene editing using CRISPR-Cas9. And it took another 10 years to get the first CRISPR therapy approved by the FDA. And this is to treat sickle cell anemia. So what are we doing at Seek? We're innovating a drug development platform, leveraging CRISPR technology in a disruptive way. The extensive time and costs of drug development continue to adversely impact society, including a lack of effective and affordable treatments for animal diseases. So we're using a different approach than other companies when they talk about CRISPR. In general, pharma is predominantly using CRISPR to edit genes and repair disease-causing mutations. We're using CRISPR to irreparably disrupt pathogenic genes and limit disease. So the benefits of the platform is we're using innovative technology using proprietary methods for unique Cas gRNAs by utilizing machine learning and computational approaches. We're looking at lowering disease progression. Our CRISPR platform disrupts pathogenic replication and achieves an in vivo reduction of virus load. By limiting the spread of the pathogen, we have an immune response activation, so the host immunity can elicit antibody production, and we found this durable antibody response that can protect treated animals or potential humans from reinfection. So to talk about ASF, we completed our first in vivo studies, and we demonstrated the extended survival of pigs with lethal infection of African swine fever. As you guys know, ASF has close to 100% mortality rate for the pandemic strain. And in 5 to 7 days, usually we would see a result of at least 40% of hogs globally. And between 2019 and 2022, there was a 196.2 billion loss. So our platform has several advantages. It targets invading ASF, inhibits invading ASF, inhibiting virus ability to replicate, has vaccine-like immune protection capabilities, does not modify or impact healthy host cells, and has the potential for universal treatment and is biotype independent. When we did our first study, we did intramuscular CRISPR delivery and intramuscular challenge with lethal doses of ASF. In ASF-infected pigs, 57% of the subjects achieved recovery versus our untreated controls. So we had 4 out of 7 surviving pigs. When we looked at what was going on in the animals, we see that it was confirmed that the reduction in virus load occurred in CRISPR-treated pigs, and this also enabled the creation of ASF-specific antibodies. So in all surviving pigs, we did have ASF-specific antibodies. And I want to point out that the surviving pigs are currently being rechallenged, and the preliminary results are very promising, but we're not at the end of our study yet. So just to conclude, ASF CRISPR is an effective control for the spread of ASF. This treatment has the potential for universal treatment of ASF. It's the first control mechanism that does not require strain-specific matching for ASF. And this ASF CRISPR treatment activates in the presence of ASF, potentially allowing a single dose with potential to provide immunity to any circulating ASF strain or biotype upon exposure. And unlike traditional vaccines where acquired immunity is not required for this platform to be effective, with the potential to be used even during active ASF outbreaks on farms. And finally, Seek's innovative CRISPR platforms have potential to be effective against other pathogens and potentially against rapid response to emerging diseases. And finally, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them now, or you can also reach out to me at doug@seeklabs.com. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Douglas. That was very, very interesting. We will start with our Q&A session, and sorry, I'm gonna switch to Spanish. Vamos a empezar con la sesión de preguntas y respuestas.
We're going to go on to the question and answer session. Right now, just like yesterday, we're going to begin with the questions here from the panel. And if you have questions for our online presenters, please put them in the chat box so that they can see them. And I would also like to make the same process that we did yesterday, in which we can try to receive the main points that were discussed here today, or the areas of opportunity that we have to continue on working jointly in this against this illness. So to begin, I don't know if anybody has a question here. One of the assistants, please raise your hand. Anybody here in the room that might have a question? We have a question with Dr. Mireldas, I think it is. Okay, let's begin with Dr. Lewis.
Hi, Doug. This is Arun. For your CRISPR
Eh,
assays,
para-
I'm sure you have in vitro data to show like 100%.
Yo sé que usted está teniendo datos que son como 100% con respecto a la replicación de virus. Sé que qué tipo de resultados están teniendo ustedes. Usted lo mostró en vivo, como que usted tenía 30 o 40% de los animales que sobrevivieron. Pero yo sé que usted tendrá microdata que muestra, tiene mayor protección, ¿ok? Sí, nosotros vemos la reducción de la ASF. Nuestra meta nunca es tratar de eliminar completamente la ASF de ningún animal o de ningún rebaño. Queremos que el sistema inmune natural que entre y pueda brindar inmunidad. Pueden imaginarse ustedes en en una finca con un brote. Si continuamos con la expulsión, es algo que no pensábamos. Pero si usted está permitiendo que los animales reciban su inmunidad del rebaño, entonces podemos controlar la enfermedad. Entonces, no siempre ver 100%, siempre queremos algunos niveles de replicación. Y vimos algunos niveles de replicación nosotros. Muy bien, perfecto, gracias.
Gracias, buenas tardes.
Thank you, good afternoon. Dr. Alexander and Andres, you were showing the panorama epidemiologically for the illness in rural communities, and it was something that was very explicative, explanational. And within your tool, there are different questions that come out. In other words, these communities of a backyard, they are included in your tool. Who feeds a tool constantly for that, those possible changes? And is this based the agent zero for the illnesses for the transmission? I don't know. I don't know if I explained myself with that question that I'm making. There are several things, I would say. The origin of the data, for those of you who are not numeric, in Mexico, there is a system after the eradication of the classic swine fever and of all these campaigns that we eradicated it, that we generated a system of mobilization or of registration of the mobilization, which is a national system for notices of a movement. It is a platform that basically exists at a national level, which collects in a very, it records the movements that take place all throughout the country. It is natural that some movements or mobilizations are not being recorded. It is something that happens. It is natural for that to happen. But nevertheless, this work is what we're doing is we're giving use to that information because previously it was just in the database. It was just included. It was recorded. The movement was registered. A certificate for movement is given. The animals are moved, but it would just remain within that data bank. And now what we're doing with the platform is precisely to make use of this information. First of all, to be able to find a sense, an epidemiological sense to this epidemiological application. And secondly, is to identify these failures or things that happen in the system. These are things that are going to support us or that are going to generate or that are going to stimulate the increase of the regulation, for example, in the mobilization, that as the analysis increases, that they could connect to the information of these producers. And if we came to massify this situation, it is very probable that we would still have mobilizations that we're not going to be able to register and that we're not going to be able to capture. So the application and the analysis of the information is precisely designed to generate a trend in the decision making or to assist in the decision making. It is clear that we're not going to generate results that are completely exact, for example, but what we are going to generate is information for the decision making in case that something like this might happen. Hopefully it won't, of an introduction to have a tool that will help us regulate the mobilization, to start generating possible scenarios of the mobilization or the control or to regulate in this case. So there are many situations, but the most important thing is to make use of that information because at a given moment and with other countries, it happens that just as I was commenting a little while ago, we are just digitalizing the information, but here it is already digitalized and it's available, so we have to make use of that information and to start to generate data, concrete data of how, at this moment, with the information that we have, what is that trend? And I was telling you, for example, regarding this analysis of communities, that I did the analysis, compared those communities and the time, and it changes. So this means that there is an evolution in the commercialization, at least in what is registered in the SNAP. So to propose a strategy based on the maps that I have shown of the communities is something that is obviously something that might be very risky, but at the level of the office, at the level of, in this case, of the veterinary services, it's something that is gold, liquid gold, because this helps us be able to determine the trends. So, of course, we need to start making a research line that is specific in that sense to be able to start generating more real information every time. And with regard to the R0, well, it can be a variable that can be used. In this case, we are not doing a modeling of the dispersion. What we're doing is a simulation of the scenarios. So in this case, a variable might be the R0, but if one way when that analysis is made and when it is proposed, the information is proposed, or when the search is done for the different parameters, we could include it, for example, in the simulations of the R0, although that's going to depend a lot of the tool, right? So here, what we're looking for is, for example, that these models, in this case, for example, we don't have the experience in the analysis of in the risk analysis of a certain determined illness or disease. There are experts that do have it, that they can generate the scenario tree and different possible parameters. And with the file that I was telling you, we could just take this file and be able to repeat it here. And there be able to make changes in the parameters and adapt them to our needs. And that is something that guarantees the repeatability of the analysis and the collection of information.
Pues digamos a nivel de campo, a nivel de tierra.
So that in a user at the field, right, on the field, any simple user, right, that doesn't have the knowledge, then they can, once the model is validated, they can operate it and do surveillance, right? With this, I insist this is just a tool that supports decision making. And if it's necessary to do more complex risk analysis with a greater level of instruments, that's not that we're going to eliminate it. I believe the most important thing is that what we are generating is ways to contribute with some alternative, especially for the countries in the region that don't have any highly trained staff in programming or statistics, because the truth is that that type of staff in our regions, it's sort of scarce in this environment, and so to speak, and it doesn't have the epidemiology training. That's something that we are looking to do with this type of tool as well, because we hope that there's people that are getting more involved, that the students are involved, that they like the epidemiology, and that in one way or another, I can start doing the analysis and realize that it is easy to do. That's what we want to show with a tool like this, that creating an analysis doesn't really require a lot of complexity, but it can be accessible. And that's precisely the part of democratizing this knowledge that we see very elevated sometimes, but the idea is to simplify it, right? And I believe I went too far in my time consumption and my answer, but that is more or less the message that we are looking for together with Pablo and Beatriz, whom have been helping us put together all these functions and all the internal working, which is the most difficult part. I would like to take advantage of Doctor having the microphone with two questions. In the PC slide, it says that it's $1,100 American dollars, and in the next slide, 17, it says that it's open code, that it's very accessible. So there's a confusion there. Is it cheap, or you have to, or is it free? Because several SMEs or governments don't have the possibility to pay $1,100. Sorry, $1,000 or $1,100 for a license might be, for some countries, might be an investment that maybe they are not able to pay or cannot put in their costs. So that's basically what we're trying to consider, right? That yes, that it's a platform, an open code platform that can be accessible and used by everybody, and at the same time that it can be collaborative. We, at the moment that we are developing the models, what we're going to include in the platform, it's a library of models that have been created. I don't know if in some other platforms there is this sort of library as well, and where you can upload there, and I as a user can go and download it. That's the idea. Also, aside from the open code, it helps us to make sure that us, in this case, Senasica, as we start doing increasing our skills in programming, then we can start manipulating the application and add to it. That happens internally, and that's the evolution, sort of, the seed that we want to plant here, right? That we have that, oh, I see that this can work. I see it easy. I see it's accessible, and I start to do more. In fact, for the authorities to be able to say, look, this is working. We can invest in other tools, because it's not just this. We still need a database. We also need servers, and those do exist, right? But what we need is, that's what we're looking for, right? That this empowers the use of the information that is available. Okay, so other countries of the Americas or the Caribbean, if they don't have enough data, to feed the platforms, then this is not going to be useful. It's not going to work. No, yes, it will. Okay, because in the contrary, because the most important thing here is that in the platform, you can increase your level of uncertainty. That means that if you don't have any data, you can add your level of uncertainty. So that you have an X prevalence, right? But that can be variation X. That's what supports the risk analysis part because we are able to do the simulation with the existing data. In fact, if we don't have the data and we have reference data from other places, because also we have to be honest, right? That these are not data that have to be gathered on the field, but we are able to take from other analysis or from other studies or from other locations and interpret and bring to the model as a parameter as well. And in fact, looking into the scalability of it all, and so I mentioned this before, the platform may work as I have this risk analysis, I need to capture information, it can be transformed, it can be reconfigured, and what we do is we become an information collector. And one of the plans that we were having was, well, why not I generated a scenario tree with qualitative analysis, for example, and we start sending that to the states, so that the member states, the governments, start feeding the data into it, and that is something we can start doing today and send it, and they can start giving us a feedback on situations that is happening right now in their governments, in their territories, and have more information than what's happening at a central level. Just as an example. So the part of the platform is to provide that solution to the needs that we have with regards to skill sets, with regards to availability of data, and to guarantee that this data is repeatable and that is congruent, yes. And with the understanding that the tool is just a tool, and that, eventually it can give you. We would need an analysis with better data quality, and that the country needs to make a lot of efforts to collect them. Yes, of course. We are not trying to deny that, or we're not trying to say that the platform is going to solve that. No, it's just to allow the other countries to start using data and generate information like this. I would like to mention very quickly that we have to consider that at the beginning is the cosmovision that we have as Mexico, right? Looking for when we analyze the data that we can have, the data that we can get on hand. But at a regional level, there's also many organisms that can help and promote this so that the countries are able to generate and say, well, this is interesting. And then the region is able to work as a region, and all of us, work together, unifying our criteria to use this type of tool. And there are organisms that are able to finance this. There's priorities, of course, in the region, especially right now. But we could be considering, how practical it could be and how valuable it would be to have data. And if you don't have specific data, but you have, or if you have something that is closer to your reality, and then this can be worked on an approach, and this type of tool can make it so that in the region we have a single system so that everybody is able to get quality information a little bit at a time, right? Given that each country is moving along in their own way, that's the idea here. Well, thank you very much. We go to Dr. Jadira now. Okay, in practical terms, let's talk about money. So how much money does a country like Dominican Republic will have to pay to start using a system like this? We need something urgent like this. We need it 3 months ago. So more or less, how much money do we have to invest to have a system like this that will allow us to obtain reports or preliminary data on real time? Well, let me give you an example. Which of the two? The mobilization one the spreading one? Well, on the spreading one, the mobilization one, and then do you have data? You have origin and destination of the mobilization?
Ok, sí. En este caso, ese desarrollo ya
Well, in that case, we can generate the system because the transition, and that's very important, and it was mentioned, the people from OIRSA, is the digitalization, right? If you're able to digitalize it, then the platform is already there. You know, in one way or another, the investment in the development is there, right? Like Prosinol. And right now, we have basically two developers. We are not such a big team for a developer team, but just two programmers are able to create a platform like this that you need. The issue here is the digitalization, right? How can we get a digitalization strategy to feed into our database? If you're able, and this is a system, this is basically a system, an IT system, where authorities, representatives, local representatives can upload the information to the platform, you can train them, and basically what we are using is just data of origin and destination. That's it. And in this case, what was the origin and which is the destination? And if you need, for example, data on traces or data on, for example, I don't know, other types of establishments, and then you have to work on that too, on the geolocalization of those establishments. If you need other establishment, that's a different type of work, right? That's more or less the investment. But the platform itself, you can build and adapt it based on the necessities that you have. And that's going to be free? Are you going to give it to us for free? Well, no, that's something that we'll discuss afterwards, yeah. But the concept, the development of the idea, that's what we are putting together here with the Prosinor budget. Everything else that includes data, yes, and all of that, we will look into it, yes. But what we are doing here is that this is cheap because we're using open code, right? And the only thing you're paying is for the people's time. And you know, the government already has a server for this. So all you have to do is talk to your IT department so that you can place the application in the server. Any IT guy, any software engineer can do those because the R platform and all the open code platforms are easy to scale up. So if you want your service to be done locally, then you can work it from your computer. But if you want it at a macro level available, then yes, you have a server. All you need is a server, and you can work from it. Of course, so you just need to have the collaboration of a software engineer because I am not a software engineer. I'm a data analyst, and that's where I have my limitations. So anyway, yes, yes, I will help. We will help you as much as we can. Well, thank you. This is just a comment and a question from for Dr. Elizabeth on her presentation, which was had a lot of information and very complete. And you mentioned a list of viral mutations that are being used and evaluated to be considered as a possible vaccination. I believe that's the main challenge right now, the vaccinations, right? And precisely, and what Dr. Aluna mentioned, these possibilities of genetic interactions between the viruses, well, it's a little bit worrying that we are following these attenuated variants. And my question is if you have any other technologies, if you're using VLPs vaccines, inactivated VLP vaccines or RNA, what are you doing there? Thank you for your question. And right now in the lab, we are working with this attenuated Vivas test. There are other platforms that we are looking for using other vectors. There are several publications that have been considered already in different places, like using adenovirus as a vector. Unfortunately, what we've seen in time is that the inactivated vaccines or dead virus vaccines don't work as well like the live attenuated vaccines. The other thing is that I believe that the subunits still need to be worked a little bit more, to be refined a little bit more. I don't have a lot of experience with the CRISPR or CRISPR that probably Dr. Douglas Gladwell has. With regards to that, I believe it's going to be an important technology to search into, but right now we are trying to look with subunits and we're trying to get that other platform that could be helpful, an option. I know, yes, I know that it's a problem with this attenuated virus, and I believe it's one of the questions in the chat that it's a problem or a what's the word? Well, a problem, yes, a possible problem, yeah, that could cause a recombination out on the field. Yes, although so far, all the information that we have with regard to it, we don't have much information about that, about the possibility of recombinations. I'm not saying that it doesn't exist, but so far we haven't seen it, and well, at least with the vaccine that we tested in Vietnam. But I do agree, yes, that this could become a problem in itself, or a concern, yes, a concern to be able to continue to manufacture these vaccines, these live attenuated vaccines. Thank you very much, Dr. Elizabeth. Yeah, I think the question was very similar to what was put in the chat. And maybe just to finish and to get the opinion of Dr. Douglas, if you consider the CRISPR technology, it's the new step to go into when we are working with recombining viruses.
I can make a couple of comments. My Spanish isn't that good, so yeah, I'm not sure exactly what Elizabeth said, but subunit vaccines that have been shown to be effective have all been non-commercially viable doses, and they in general didn't repeat for current outbreak strains. When we're looking at recombination on the field, a lot of what I did over the last couple of years was go to different outbreak areas and evaluate farmers' practices and what was going on. And I think we have to take that in mind, that in what's going on in Asia, what goes on in Europe, and what goes on in Africa is very, very differently. In Africa, if a pig survives ASF infection, that's the gold pig. It's going to be kept around for a very long time because it's ASF resistant. So you see different types of evolution of the virus. And one example of that is with genotype 2. We see a very different evolution in Asia than what we saw in Africa, where we see these large deletions. Those have not occurred in Asia. And the genotype 1-2 hybrid is likely from illegal use of the Portugal vaccine that was put into Asia. That vaccine caused crippling arthritis, but pigs survived. And in areas where there's no animal rights, crippling arthritis was better than having dead pigs. So I think when you have these different factors of multiple viruses in the same areas, or potential vaccines in areas where that current isolate doesn't exist, like it's pretty widely known that genotype 2 and genotype 9 likely don't cross-react, and there's a lot of rumors of experiments on that. If you put a genotype 2 vaccine where there's genotype 9 and it's not effective, you're going to have two genomes in animals. So there is a likelihood of selective pressure at that stage. And that's a question that's been asked by a lot of people since we started to introduce vaccines into Vietnam. And what's the selective pressure once you start vaccinating for genotype 2? Does genotype 9 now escape Africa and now it's all over Asia? And if it happened once, could it happen again? I think these are a lot of things that we're really not going to know until time, right, until we see what happens. Of course, now I'm working on, CRISPR type technology, and our platform does target multiple areas in ASF. That part of the design is to make sure there are areas that don't have any selective pressure to change. So you wouldn't likely get any adaptations or any adaptations quickly that could be escape mutants. And I think that's one advantage we have, but again, it has to be put into practice, and we have to see what happens in the field over time to see if there could be any type of recombinations that could escape our treatment, or in the same sense, it could escape live attenuated vaccines or subunit vaccines.
Right. Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Douglas. Estamos muy cerca de
Thank you,
terminar.
Dr. Douglas. We are very close to our deadline that we have in agenda, 4 p.m., and this is mostly because of the interpreters. So we would like to, just summarize in 3 or 4 ideas that we can get out of today's discussions that we can bring to the next meetings in the years. Anyone would like to help me on gathering this last thoughts, takeaways? Thank you, Dr. Susana. We would like to finish with the concept of the biotechnology and development that includes these new strategies for the prevention of important diseases, like the case of the ASF, but not only in the case of this virus, but also other viruses that affect the swine production in Mexico. I believe it's important to apply different techniques and biotechnology possibilities to fight diseases, like in our case, focused on the development of recombining antigens, but as it's been mentioned by other researchers, the case of new strategies like the strategy for CRISPs, and in which we've also had some participation with some projects and to response of the antivirus for small ruminants. I would like to finish with that and then give the floor to Dr. Sandra that has another takeaway. Thank you. I would just like to point out the importance that the support between countries and collaborators, because our project, it's a live example that if we didn't have that support, that collaboration that has been established in a project like this one with Forci Norte, our development could be very good, yes, but it will be left in a position where there is no movement forward. So like it was said yesterday by the doctor, Dr. Econa, we have to focus towards a common objective with the support of the experts from the different countries. I believe is fundamental to be able to have success in solution solving, in problem solving, sorry. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you. Thank you. I believe, and if I can comment one more time, I believe that all the development of sessions like this has been focused specifically and directly to the presence and to the presence in domestic pork. And we have to consider that in all of North America, in the continental land of North America, Canada, United States, and Mexico, we have an important presence of wild pork and wild pigs. And I haven't heard anything about what can we do with that species. And we know due to the background in Asia and Africa that the wild pigs have a fundamental role as the reserves of these diseases, because they are very resistant from the clinical point of view to this disease. Even when being sick, they are able to spread the disease effectively. And I have not heard any involvement of a natural protection or natural protected areas, or what would be the activities to be carried out in the wild pigs available in the North American region. Thank you.
Maybe Aruna can answer this too, but I know in Canada it's a priority. They look at wild hogs industry, the Pork Federation, agriculture and agriculture. Like I've seen that discussion in Canada. It hasn't been a discussion part of Forci Norte, but I'm glad to bring it forth in the future in meetings. Maybe you wanted to add something about Canada?
Yeah, so they are looking at, there are some surveillance activities and things like that in small scale for wild boars in Canada. We don't have a huge population of wild boars, very restricted to certain provinces, but we do have wild boars in Canada, but very away from the industrial swine operations, but we do have, and then it has caught attention, and we are looking at wild boars and how we can sample them and things like that. Yeah, it's ongoing activities.
I would like to, no. Me gustaría mencionar un
I would like
aspecto
to mention an aspect that, particularly in the Dominican Republic, is something that has not been studied, but that is something very important from the point of view of public health and the environment of one's health. And it is a social impact that the appearance of these illnesses has on the population. The stress to which the pork producers, the stress to which the producers are subject, the stress to which the traders is very, very high. And many of these families are very low income, and that their livelihood is threatened. It brings a lot of consequences for the mental health of all the people that are involved in this. We also have to take into account the burnout of the veterinarian doctors who work on the field. It is incredible, especially the frustrations from the point of view that we cannot agree between one and the others. And it would be very good if we could start evaluating the weight that our health has to have to deal, we ourselves as professionals, and also to have to work with populations, because that's maybe a way we can create a better bridge to be able to improve the communication from us, that we are working to enforce the laws to those people who have to comply with them. Okay, thank you very much. Definitely, this has been a topic that has opened many discussions. I see many areas of opportunity, and once again, I see the cooperation between different experts from different agencies, from different countries. This is a key issue to face, not only this illness, but many others. And that is why we're gathered here today. I thank all of our panel members, their participation. I thank our guests here, and also please let's meet tomorrow again for our last session of this workshop. Thank you very much to all of you, and good afternoon. Have a good evening.